And hello, my friends, and welcome on board. My name is Derek Fennell, and I'm your host on the NexGen Podcast. And you're right on time for takeoff. So take your seats, fasten your seatbelts, and sit back and enjoy the flight on the NexGen Podcast. Welcome on board. And hello, ladies and gentlemen. Well, once again, welcome back to NexGen Podcast, where we have the infamous Dr. Micheal N. Lieberman, the managing director and co-founder of the IPQ Analytic LC. And I'd like to say good morning, Doctor, and thank you for joining us on Next Gen Podcast.
Well, thank
And
you for the opportunity.
yeah, we had we tried to do this earlier today, and we had like some gremlins that popped
Yeah,
up on us, but that's a perfect metaphor for healthcare data, right?
right.
Lots of some noise, and today we'll turn that noise into some insight. And so, Dr. Lieberman is a theoretical chemist and protein crystal crystallography.
Yeah,
Am I mentioning that correctly? And
no,
he's also the managing director of the IP Analytics and LLC, and serves on a number of boards, and he's quite a thought leader in the healthcare industry. And so, Doctor, if you would just share with us how you moved from theoretical chemistry into biomedicine for women and health.
sure. I I was always interested in sort of trying to figure out what's the real problem that needs to be solved, not necessarily what's the method and the tools that I was learning. And I started out in academics, and I started my career expecting to be an academic. And I spent about 8 years. I was at Fox Chase Cancer Center and Mount Sinai School of Medicine. And I saw that the problems that seemed to be real world problems were not being addressed in the conventional academic environment at the time because they really were interdisciplinary issues. And a lot of academics back in that period were much more straight lined. This is what we do, and this is who we do it with. And I got recruited to industry, and actually, Amoco, the oil company, who was in biotechnology, as all the oil companies were, because they feared gas would run out. And I got involved in looking at biomarkers for breast cancer. And as I did that and probed further and further, because they could develop biomarkers with high degree of quality, I
Hmm.
realized while they could develop markers, we had no idea what the disease was. And
Wow.
that's what challenged me. The idea that there were lots of things we could do, but we didn't necessarily know what the best thing to do would be. And so that started me on that path. I worked on the original HER2 test, which is used now quite a bit, figuring out who should get it, who shouldn't get it, and so on. And then I got recruited into the pharma industry because I assumed at the time pharma, of course, must understand disease, even if diagnostics doesn't understand disease. And I found out no, actually, pharma doesn't understand disease. They understand how to build drugs.
Well,
And I spent about 12 years in pharma trying to bring that added piece together, initially with Wyeth and then with Roche, where I was global head of computational biology and genomics, and finally figured it wasn't going to work. I wasn't going to convince them they needed to understand the disease a lot better. I went back to academics, to the University of Pennsylvania Cancer Center, thinking that after 12 years, academics had changed, and it actually hadn't, but that shouldn't be that surprising.
hmm hmm
And then I got recruited to become the executive director of a breast cancer center sponsored by the
Wow.
Department of Defense jointly with Walter Reed Army Medical Center. And we did everything that I wanted to do when I was in academics, and I was told it'll never work. When I started to work with the DoD, they said, go ahead. And that was
Wow.
the environment that I
Okay.
needed to do that.
Wow, wow, that's a very interesting journey, you know. And I know now that you're in the area of dealing with women's health is your
Mhm.
primary focus,
Yeah.
correct? And in specific, I noticed about you deal with perimenopause and the risk, you know. So would you elaborate on that? Give us some insight
Yeah.
on how that
So,
works.
when I was working initially in breast cancer, of
Hmm.
course, to understand the disease, I was interested in what are the risk factors and things of that nature. And I was observing what happens when a woman or any patient goes into the doctors,
Hmm.
and what they would ask you when you go in, and men or women, questions like, do you smoke and how much do you smoke?
Hmm.
But the reality is, your smoking patterns over the course of your lifetime are more important than what you did last week,
Okay.
because you're continuing to develop, and at different points in your development, smoking or obesity or alcohol, etc., all are going to
Hmm.
have different effects.
Hmm.
And it's
Hmm.
going to be different when you're younger than it is when you're older. Some may be more critical, some may be associated with cancer, some may be associated with cardiovascular disease. But even though everybody was looking at genetics at the time and genomics and talking
Hmm.
about BRCA1 genes, the statistics were showing that only 10% of all breast cancers were associated with that,
Hmm.
which meant 90% of the breast cancers didn't necessarily have a clear genetic marker. And the biggest factor that associated with that was age or menopausal status. And so that said to me, maybe we need to understand menopause and perimenopause.
Hmm. Hmm.
And even though that's not obviously where I'm trained, it showed up to me as the problem that we should start to look at because it had a
Hmm.
lot of applications.
Hmm.
And that's what we've carried on, understanding that it was a simple reasoning that women don't go through perimenopause and menopause the same, but we have no idea about that. And that may be very critical for understanding their different risk for breast cancer or cardiovascular disease, but we have no data on that. And so
Wow.
that's what led to a lot of the things we're doing now.
Okay. If you were designing or redesigning a checkup for, say, women between 45 and 65 for menopause or cancer, you know, what three questions would you be looking to measure and add
We're,
up?
we're actually, to be honest with you, in our study, we're studying, we're initiating our study to collect data from puberty on, not when they
Okay.
get to 45,
Okay.
because
Okay.
there's major hormonal changes that take place, of course, in puberty, and then
Mhm.
also during pregnancies, which typically are going to be younger than 45. And,
Mhm.
and so these are the things that we think may have the biggest impact later in life when you start to enter perimenopause.
Mhm.
And that's the
Mhm.
kind of data that we don't have. And that's the data
Mhm.
where we're focusing on collecting. We're trying
Mhm.
to show the value of collecting it in what we call retrospective manner, meaning
Mhm.
asking women about their history, even though that's
Mhm.
not the most accurate. But we want to do that to show the feasibility of going forward and setting up a longitudinal study where we would recruit women at puberty and follow them over their lifetime. But that's a big study and an expensive one. And first, we have to show why that could actually produce significant changes in how we manage development and normal and abnormal development for women.
So you basically saw about engineering graphs and stuff. That's basically what your company is about, right? Is
Yeah,
how does that?
we're not a conventional AI ML company, which everyone asks
Mhm.
us about.
Mhm.
Partial. I started working with machine learning back in the 80s. So I've
Wow.
been involved in it a long time and there's a lot of value to it, but
Mhm.
we're interested in solving problems. And so
Okay.
my focus is how do we identify what's the right question to ask that needs to be answered? and
Mhm.
then what's the right tool to address that.
Mhm.
And we will use AI and ML, conventional
Mhm.
AI and ML or machine learning
Mhm.
when it's
Mhm.
appropriate. But a lot of the questions that we're starting to see that are important aren't addressable using that way because the data
Okay.
doesn't even exist.
Okay.
And so
So,
we're building these complex models using something called a knowledge graph.
okay. So the average everyday female, how can she assist in what you're doing? How can they help? Is
Yeah.
it a personal, is there something personal that they can do to make your work easier?
Yeah, we've launched a study that's accessible on the internet, and we're collaborating with a group in Delaware called Pretty Moody. And
Mhm.
if you go to the Pretty Moody website, there's a
Mhm.
link to the study. And that group in particular has a network of African American women,
Mhm.
although we work in all populations. And that link would bring someone to the study and they can answer the questions. And the questions are set up so that a woman could answer them without having to look at medical records or go to the doctor, but it's just her personal recollection of her life.
Mhm.
And
Could
that's what we're trying to collect initially.
could you give an example of what a question would look like, that
Yeah, so
scenario?
yeah, it's common to talk about pregnancies, and a
Mhm.
lot of studies collect pregnancy data.
Mhm.
But what they collect is how many pregnancies you had and how old were you when you had them.
Mhm.
Okay.
Mhm.
What we're interested in, because we're looking at not correlation, but causality, and that's why machine learning isn't necessarily the optimal tool for us, because we're trying to get to causal relationships. What
Mhm.
actually forces that to happen?
Mhm.
The question we're asking is not just how many pregnancies did you have, but how old was the child when they were born? How long
Mhm.
into the pregnancy?
Mhm.
Because what we've observed is during a pregnancy, a normal pregnancy, there's hormones that are produced by the fetus and by the mother, and there's an expected 39 to 40-week pregnancy that hormones will reach a certain level. But if a woman delivers significantly earlier than that, she won't receive exposure to all those hormones from herself
Okay.
or the fetus. And
Okay.
we suspect, we don't know, that that may be important for understanding her development after delivery, postpartum, and
Okay.
therefore impact things like perimenopause or breast cancer risk. And so
Okay.
that
Okay.
kind of data doesn't exist. That's the kind of data we're collecting. The other
Mhm. Mhm.
example is almost any woman is probably used to the idea of having a checklist of what symptoms have you experienced going through perimenopause. And of course, hot flashes are a prime example.
Mhm.
There's two aspects to that. One is we think women go through perimenopause uniquely, and we don't have the data to show how your path is different from your friends. But because med school only has about an hour of training on menopause, your physicians also don't have the background and data to be able to always help you with what you're experiencing. And so, one of
Mhm.
the things we're interested in is explain to women, because we know the natural tendency then is for women to form networks of friends and consult with them about what they experienced. It's just a natural tendency. But what we have to explain to women is your hot flashes and your friends' hot flashes aren't going to necessarily be the same, which means they're going to respond to things differently than you will. And
Mhm.
all you can say is you both had hot flashes and they may have been different. So what we're really trying to collect then is we know that hot flashes are just one of the symptoms. There's a checklist we use that has about 62 different symptoms that are observed. But having a checklist isn't adequate for what we want to do because if we're looking at development, we have to understand when things happened. And so
Mm-hmm.
what we're actually asking is, when did the symptom occur? In what order did symptoms occur? And which symptoms occurred together, so we can get an
Mm-hmm.
idea of your individual journey and be able to give you better guidance on what to
Mm-hmm.
expect or what not to expect.
Okay. Like when they're out visiting their personal doctor, how do you get them injected with this process to be able to give that guidance that you're speaking of?
Well, we're our goal is to make this data available. So we've
Mm-hmm.
actually created a nonprofit. We're not doing this in a company for profit. IPQ
Mm-hmm.
Analytics is a consulting group that works
Mm-hmm.
internationally, but we've carved out a nonprofit called Woven, and that's where we're doing this developmental work. So the idea is we want to do this for the public good. We think it has value, but it's not the
Mm-hmm.
kind of short term return on investment that most
Mm-hmm.
investment groups or pharma would see. And
Mm-hmm.
so rather than um, potentially redirect the effort to something that does have a short-term return,
Mm-hmm.
I decided that we should do it the way I think it should be done,
Mm-hmm.
and the nonprofit vehicle gives us the opportunity to do it. So then we publish papers. I make presentations. I'm making one in Europe next week. In fact, I just
Mm-hmm.
presented to a breast cancer survivor group last night. And the idea, and we also hold public forums. The idea is that we want to share this because if we don't have an interaction, I, coming as a male who doesn't go through female menopause, although
Mm-hmm.
there's questions about male menopause, without going through
Yep.
female menopause, I have to
Mm-hmm.
learn from talking to women what they're going through or
Right.
from physicians and what they're seeing.
Mm-hmm.
And that's important to be able to actually carry out the research we want to do.
Okay. Okay. So these, if understanding you right, you're speaking to people in the medical profession as well as to local average individuals
Yes.
and educating them as well as to what they
Right.
need to be thinking about when they go see their doctors. Is
Well,
that
and
that be it?
yeah, so I'm not a clinician. I'm not trained as a clinician. I don't try, and I wouldn't be allowed to give clinical advice. And
Mm-hmm.
you should never expect to get clinical advice from me. But one piece of advice that I do give, and I've had the physicians I work with support this, is on average, a woman may see her gynecologist once a year or once every other
Mm-hmm.
year.
Mm-hmm.
Your gynecologist has a list of questions they want to ask you. They have 15 minutes that they're going to see you.
Mm-hmm.
You're not going to be able to relate to them everything that's happened in a year or in 2 years,
Mm-hmm.
and they won't necessarily be able to absorb that.
Mm-hmm.
So, what I recommend is that women keep a journal, especially if they
Mm-hmm.
do it on a computer, of things that they're going through. It
Mm-hmm.
doesn't have to be heavily documented in any way, but just
Mm-hmm.
observations or
Mm-hmm.
questions. And
Mm-hmm.
they make a copy of that and they leave that with their physician because
Mm-hmm.
the physician isn't going to sit there and read through it with you,
Mm-hmm.
but may have questions and then be able to go through it and see if there's things in there that they really should be asking about that
Mm-hmm.
wouldn't be what they ask about in their normal set of questions. And
Mm-hmm.
you don't have to worry that you forgot when you walk out of the doctor's office, you forgot to tell them about something that happened 18 months ago
Mm-hmm.
because it just wasn't fresh in your mind.
Okay. Excellent advice. Thank you for that, for sharing that. I got another question for you. If you were to like look out 5 years from now,
Hmm.
what would you like the medical industry to look like? How would you like to see things change realistically? What could happen in the next 5 years with what you're doing?
Well, in general,
Mm-hmm.
there's a lot of push right now for things that are wearables to be able to pick up signals in your daily life. The challenge we have is most of the wearables are technology directed at things that we already measure,
Mm-hmm.
and they don't necessarily look beyond the way we approach these things in
Mm-hmm.
general. So I'll give you an example. We've talked about our work in perimenopause. The other
Mhm.
focus area we have is infant and maternal morbidity and mortality, and looking at things like preeclampsia. And that has a significant detrimental impact on fetus and mother.
Mhm.
And it shows, of course, very disparate statistics in different population groups. And we don't really have a treatment for it. It's a complex set of conditions that presents a challenge. One of the hallmarks of that is having high blood pressure during your pregnancy.
Ah.
And that led us to start to study high blood pressure or blood pressure
Mhm.
in general, especially because we were working with Morehouse School of Medicine. And again, because I have to fill in my background that I don't
Mhm.
have. You know,
Mhm.
I know when I go to the doctor and they put a cuff on and they measure my blood pressure, but I
Mhm.
wanted to go a bit more deeply. And we know that in the African American population, blood pressure is very different from in Caucasians. But
Mhm.
what's really different is, and isn't actually taught at all, if it, very much of it all, is that
Mhm.
blood pressure undergoes a circadian pattern, which means that there's a regular pattern over the course of 24 hours. And it
Mhm.
can vary about 20% over that time period. And that dip that occurs, which occurs normally during the night, is noted to be different in African American populations from Caucasian populations, but
Mhm.
isn't
Mhm.
necessarily one that's heavily studied.
Mhm.
The challenge, of course, is you're not wearing a cuff. And
Mhm.
if you're not wearing a cuff, that's the way we measure blood pressure. But
Mhm.
what we're not doing, and I've spoken to a number of physicians about this, the actual guidelines for how to measure blood pressure are not being followed. All the detailed elements of how you actually are supposed to measure blood pressure are very, very rarely, if ever, followed. I met one
Mm.
physician who had recently retired, and I was discussing this with him, and he told me that his entire life, he's never had his blood pressure measured in accordance with the guidelines, to give you an idea.
Wow. Wow.
Okay. And
Yeah.
and so if your blood pressure varies over the course of the day, when you go in the doctor's office, where in that course of the day are you? Are you at the peak? Are you at the valley? You can imagine that that could make a significant difference in how
Sure.
you're being evaluated. And
Mhm.
so, what we're trying to do is work with some wearables that would enable us to sample your blood pressure on a much more regular basis, actually
Mhm.
not use the cuff, but a different mechanism, because we think the cuff actually causes perturbation. If you're wearing a cuff at night, it'll wake you up. If you're wearing a cuff in the day, you anticipate that it's going to inflate to measure your blood pressure, and your blood pressure goes up. And
Right.
so it doesn't give you your actual baseline blood pressure. And what we're
Mhm.
trying to do is see if we can not take the guidelines we currently use for hypertension, but
Mhm.
actually personalize your hypertension
Mhm.
and understand where you have, what are the underlying causes of your hypertension, which would enable us to take the different drugs that we do have available and treat you personally, which is the goal of personalized medicine, but
Mhm.
treat you for your hypertension. And
Mhm.
in this
Mhm.
case of preeclampsia, what we really want to do, because it doesn't get diagnosed until 20 weeks of gestation, when almost all the organs are fairly developed, what we would like to do is preconception enable a woman to be evaluated as to her risk for preeclampsia so that
Mhm.
she could either be followed differently or potentially treated for the potential hypertension, knowing what
Mhm.
her specific hypertension was, to try to mitigate preeclampsia before it ever develops. So that's
Oh.
the kind of thing we see for the future because that involves technology, it involves analytics, it involves the FDA approving new ways to do things that we think we already know how to do. And so it takes a lot of pieces, moving parts to make that kind of change. So it's not going to happen overnight.
Okay. For those of us who are not medically aware, could you give a layman's interpretation of what preeclampsia is?
Preeclampsia? It's a combination of high blood pressure and proteinuria, which means you're breaking down proteins. And
Mm-hmm.
basically, it involves the interaction of the mother with the placenta and causes
Ah,
problems for both because of that.
okay.
And that's the way
Okay.
it tends to be measured, looking at hormones that are being produced or markers. But again, as I
Okay.
said, the guidelines say it diagnosed at 20 weeks. And what we like to do is not take the chance that at 20 weeks there may have been an effect on the fetus or on the mother, but
Mhm.
really move this to the front of the pregnancy.
And the other thing that I wanted to ask, you mentioned about a doctor that had retired and he spent his whole life having his blood pressure measured but was never measured correctly.
Mhm.
Could you give us some insight on what a proper blood pressure gauge should look like when we're
Well,
getting?
it's not the gauge, it's how it's used.
Okay.
So I think almost everyone has experienced the fact that some people have what they call white coat syndrome. So they get
Mm-hmm.
nervous when they're going to the doctor,
Okay.
or they may be late for their appointment, so they ran upstairs,
Mm-hmm.
or they have other stress going on that's going to
Mm-hmm.
affect their actual blood pressure.
Mm-hmm.
So part of the guideline is that you should be sitting for about 30 minutes unperturbed.
Mm-hmm.
Then the cuff should be fitted to your arm, not just the cuff that's available, because that impacts and can have a difference of about 10 to 15 points in your blood pressure if it's the wrong size. Your
Mm-hmm.
arm should
Mm-hmm.
be at a certain angle
Mm-hmm.
and maintained at that angle. Your feet should be on the floor. The blood pressure should be measured 3 times in each arm, and you should not
Easy.
be having conversations while it's being measured. Okay?
Wow. Okay.
And
Okay.
I would have to ask you, have you ever had that done?
No. I'm 68. No.
Okay. I haven't either. And I'm older than that.
And are you saying that this is the this is
The guidelines from
FDA
the AMA.
guidelines? Wow. Wow. Okay. So so it's
But
just a
part of the reason is it's time consuming. And if you
yeah.
have 15 minutes for an appointment, it's going to eat up the time.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Because we want to run as many people through that office as possible. Wow, wow. You're giving out some very good information here. Okay, this has been really, really informative. Combine 3 to 5 questions and give us one decision that flips, takes you a 5-year lens on how to convince skeptics. How would you convince those people that you're fighting against that they need to take part of this?
Well, so if you take an example, the blood pressure, okay,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
the reality of what we're doing should potentially impact all of hypertension.
Mm-hmm.
So it should have a much broader application.
Mm-hmm.
But that would require changing all the standards, and that would be very disruptive. So
Mm-hmm.
what we're doing is we're focusing on preeclampsia because we know there's an unmet need in preeclampsia. And if
Mm-hmm.
we can show the value in preeclampsia where there's an unmet need and people are willing to try new things, then we have the potential to show the value for a much bigger change in medicine.
Okay. Okay. And I guess I got one last final question. If you could give a tip to just one tip to help these women have a
Yeah.
better life, a better health, what's the number one thing you would say they need to?
Well, it is the tip I gave about keeping a journal,
Okay.
okay?
Okay. Yes.
Because
Okay.
then you're not relying on your memory
Okay.
and you can
Okay.
share it with your physician. And they may even ask you questions that you don't remember until you leave the office that actually happened. And this is one way to make sure you have the optimal communication with your physician about your health, your personal health, and your personal experience. And so we're doing this not only in perimenopause and so on, but we're trying to do this also in multiple sclerosis to
Mm.
try to understand what things may have occurred
Mm-hmm.
because it's natural that everyone doesn't for everything go to a doctor,
Mm-hmm.
but they may
Mm-hmm.
have experienced something what abnormal,
Mm-hmm. Okay.
and it may be passing, but it may actually at the end of the day be significant to have
Mm-hmm.
that information.
Okay. So so you're saying anytime, because people don't just walk around and keep a journal.
No,
So you're saying anytime you feel something different, log it.
yeah, log it.
Yeah,
That's
if you're
all.
feeling different about something,
Yeah,
just
it's not
make a
a diary.
log about it.
It's not a diary. It's
Mm-hmm.
just a log of things that you woke up with
Okay.
headaches, but
Yeah.
then they went away, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Things like that.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. It's like a medical log.
Exactly.
So, okay. That's a great tip. Thank you for that. Thank you for that. And
That's for
on
men
this
too.
note, go ahead. Go ahead. What was that?
That's for men too.
Okay. I'm appreciate you sharing that with us, because I think that's a great tip. I think I will start doing that. Just
Okay.
so anytime I'm feeling a little off or whatever,
Yeah.
just keep a log, like a medical log. At 10 a.m., I woke
Yeah.
up, I had a slight headache,
Yeah.
which is unusual.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, and you just start keeping that log, and then over a course of a year or so, you'll start to see a pattern,
Exactly. That's the idea.
and you want to capture the pattern,
Right.
and if you capture the pattern, then you can take it to your physician and
Right.
say, "This is what's happening.
Right.
This is I've been logging this."
Yeah.
Great advice. Thank you for sharing that, because I don't think anybody's ever told me to do anything like that.
Yeah.
People tell you about keeping a diary, and because you want to see where you, where you were last year or whatever, how you're progressing. But nobody's ever talked about keeping a log of your medical, and I think that's a great tip.
Yeah.
That's a great tip. So, on that note, Doctor, I think this has been a very informative interview. I can't wait to get feedback from it, and I think you've definitely begun to crack that shell open that we should all be aware of, how to take better care of ourselves. I certainly appreciate you. Thank you for taking the time to enlighten us.
Maybe I can leave my email address and my website.
Yes, yes, please do leave. I would like for you to leave your contact information,
Yeah.
how people can get in touch with you.
Right.
Also, would like you talked about a couple of programs that you go to that people can go to check.
Hmm. Yeah.
Those programs, I can't remember the name of
Well,
them.
Pretty Moody is one of
Pretty
them.
Moody, yes, Pretty Moody, and it was another one.
Yeah. It was the Delaware Breast Cancer Coalition.
Okay, so yeah, go ahead, Doc. Please share your contact information.
Okay. Yeah. So my email is Michael.Liebman, and you see my name spelled on the screen at
Mhm, mhm,
IPQ, P as in Paul, Q,
mhm, mhm,
analytics.com. And if
mhm,
you go there, it talks both about what we do in our normal consulting business, but the section on women's health highlights what we're trying to do in women's health. And the website, then that's my email. The website is just www.ipqanalytics.com. And please feel free to contact me with questions or ideas, things of that nature. But
mhm,
I
mhm,
will just add the disclaimer, I'm not a clinician. I don't give clinical advice. I shouldn't give clinical advice. I won't give clinical advice. So
mhm.
that's not something that I can provide. but I'm happy to
You're
share.
more on the research side of
Yeah,
the industry
yeah,
is what you do. You do research.
yes.
Okay, okay. Well, that is great. Thank you. But you've been sharing some great tips, some great information, and I hope everyone, like the doctor said, if you have questions or whatever, please reach out to his organization. Have your physicians reach out to his organizations.
And it's prettymoody.com
Pretty
is the
moody.
website you may want to also go to for information. And the link
Okay, and
is
that deals with prettymoody.com. That deals with the perimenopause, correct?
right, right.
Okay, and breast cancer, right?
Well, it's mainly the perimenopause and menopause.
Okay, okay. And then the other organization was
The Delaware Breast Cancer Survivors.
Delaware Breast Cancer. Okay. So yeah, folks, please take these tips, do something with them, and thank you, doctor, for sharing with us
Hmm.
your information. And
Thank
ladies
you.
and gentlemen, once again, welcome to. Thank you for joining us, brother. Thank you for joining us on the Next Gen Podcast. We look forward to seeing you again soon. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Doc, and
Yeah.
have a good day.
Thank you.